Alright, it's time once again for your nuclear DM to explode. No, that's wrong. Okay, we're on to Lost Mine of Phandelver, Part 1, Goblin Arrows. This chapter I kind of see as being like the tutorial chapter for anyone who's brand new to the game. If you have a group of players who are all brand new, I'd say just do this chapter as is. Especially if you're brand new too, then you should all do it together. If your players especially are like not brand new to this game, I would suggest starting in chapter 2 and then coming back to chapter 1. Starting in Phandelver. And then someone can send them out on a quest to do chapter 1, pretty much. Chapter 1 is very railroady no matter how you slice it. It's almost always find the dead horses, get attacked by goblins, follow the trail back to Cragmaw Cavern, avoiding 2 traps probably, and then taking down Cragmaw Cavern and fighting off Clean Clark, the first boss of the game. Now, the party begins on a road, going to Tribord Trail. They're coming from Neverwinter and going down Tribord Trail to Phandelver. It's many miles to get to and from there. So the party's been hired by Gundren Rockseeker to come directly behind them, but they got a head start. Gundren and Sildar Hollowwinter, which is a member of the Lloyd's Alliance. We'll talk about that in a later video, probably. They've been captured, but the party doesn't know that until maybe a bit later. One of the major problems with this opening is that it's very railroady. It pretty much just like forces your player characters to go in exactly one direction the entire time. And you can kind of steer them in that direction too, and that's maybe part of it. So there's a fine tutorial bit. I feel it kind of teaches new DMs the wrong way of doing things. You should always let your players drive the story, and this is not your players driving the story. This is the story driving itself, which should never happen. I would call the dungeon that you get to, the Cragmaw Cavern, is kind of railroady because they'll almost always take this path. But I always kind of feel like once the players get to a dungeon, like the dungeon just takes control in a way. But this opening is very railroady, and outside of with brand new players or a brand new DM, I wouldn't do it as written. Okay, how it's supposed to go is basically the player characters will more than likely step forward to investigate the crime scene, but as soon as they do that, 4 goblins run out and attack them. You play combat. Remember that thing I said in my DM tips video about cheating for your players so that the monsters don't kill them? Your players are level 1. Any monster is basically deadly to a level 1 character, so you should go easy on them, at least until they're level 2. At the same time, don't be afraid to hurt them, just try not to kill them. Then they follow them back to the Cragmaw Cavern. You can choose to use the traps or not. If you're leveling people up with XP, I would use the traps since they'll most likely see them anyway. And then you can give them XP for avoiding them. And that'll teach them that they can get experience points for things outside of combat. But if you're playing with milestones, I would probably just take them out. Just let them go back to Cragmaw Cavern safely. Traps while traveling in the woods, especially, isn't really that common in D&D or modules in general. And unless you're planning on homebrewing and stuff with a lot of traps out in the wilderness or something, this probably isn't really teaching your characters anything. Or it's teaching them the wrong thing, to be like always on the lookout for traps, but like for the most part, you should feel safe from those types of hazards when you're out in the wilderness. Usually if there's a hazard and you're out traveling, it's never man-made. It's always like a natural disaster or something that the characters then have to deal with, or it's a bunch of monsters that attack them. If you're not using milestones and using XP for them to level up though, I would use these traps just as like an opening trap, only if you're using this opening. Then they get to Cragmaw Hideout. This is a pretty easy dungeon to run. Keep in mind that goblins are notoriously opportunistic and cowardly. So if a goblin takes too much damage, it'll probably start to run away. They can disengage as a free action. Remember that too. So if it starts to run away, it can disengage and then dash, meaning that it moves double its movement speed to run away from the players. Okay, I'll just go through each room one at a time. The cave mouth, number 1, is basically just the entry point. There's nothing to do here. The players will probably wonder about the river, but it's not that deep, so it's not dangerous really. So that's number 1. Number 2, the goblin blind. There's 2 goblins in the trees here. It just says 2 goblins are stationed here. I usually say that they're up in a treehouse just to make it a little more interesting. It also says they're distracted, which I totally do. You know, they're usually like talking to each other. Sometimes the characters overhear them. Occasionally the goblins catch the characters first, so I think the characters are being especially loud. The kennel, which has a bunch of dogs that are tied up, and there's absolutely nothing here. So a lot of things can happen here though. Some players just choose to ignore this room. The ones who don't calm the animals down, because at first they're like barking and being loud, but they feed them some of their food, or just make animal handling rolls. They can calm them down. If they want to try to get to the end, they can just climb up this giant fissure at the top and get to the top here, but it's pretty steep and kind of hard to do. And you should kind of indicate that, I think, as they come in this room, that like if they were to climb up into Area 8, essentially bypass everything else of this dungeon, the players wouldn't know that. But if they did that, just mention that it would be very hard to climb. They'll basically avoid this wall. Next, they go up. As they're walking through this hall, with the river through it, the goblins in Area 5 have a chance of seeing them, and then they'll activate a trap, essentially. That's just a bunch of water flowing through. This water trap, you might want to up the difficulty just a bit, just because anytime a player in one of my games has activated it, it has yet to do anything. Kind of just a surprising thing, and then they don't think about it again. Next to the Goblin Den, which has 6 goblins in it, one of which is a goblin leader. And if the party is big enough, they can fight their way through it. But if it's like a smaller party of like 2 or 3 people, then you should probably indicate that like they don't want to get into a fight here, and could probably talk to these goblins instead. So once they come out and start talking to the goblins will negotiate with them, because the leader here wants King Clark gone, who's the bugbear in the final room. It's the boss fight at the end, pretty much. If you can get the PCs to talk to them, he'll more than likely say, I don't really want to watch over this guy anyway. Sildar Hallwater, the person who's kidnapped here. But if you get rid of King Clark, I'll just give him to you, essentially. And though he's a goblin, he'll probably hold up his word. It really doesn't like babysitting humans or something like that. The next few rooms are pretty much just fights. There's goblins on the overpass in Area 5. There's goblins in Twin Pool Caves on Area 7. There's the boss fight at the end. If you don't know how to run combat after running all these combats, you probably shouldn't be a dungeon master. So that's essentially the chapter as written. Now I'm going to talk about just the ways I'd remix this chapter to make it a little more interesting and a little more fun, especially for people who have played D&D before. If you're playing with new players and do it as written, it's fine. I don't know. I feel like there's always a better way. Like there's always something that like the people who wrote this campaign didn't really consider. But at the same time, you know, when they write modules, they're written for a multitude of DMs. You know, they're not written for your game specifically. They'd be written awesomely, but just for you, you know, because each DM is different. And some good advice I found recently is to always go with your gut, to follow your instincts. If as you're reading an adventure, something doesn't feel right to you, just take it out. If you feel like there's a way you could do it better, then do it. You know, do it that way. Don't do it the way it's written. And that goes for me too. If I give you advice that you don't like, don't do it. If I give you advice that you feel you could do better than what I say, do it that way instead. Because no matter what you're doing, a module or writing your own adventure or whatever, you should always be adapting it. Keep in mind what you do the best versus the things you probably don't want to do. I'm going to try to get some tips on how to run this a bit better. And like I said, don't use all of my advice. And don't use all the advice given in this book. Even though this is a fine adventure to be run as is, even if you are screwing things up a little here and there, or you're figuring things out a bit, it's like I said, just go with your gut. And if your instincts tell you that you should do something differently, then do it that way. Don't even have a second thought about it. Immediately change it to make it work for you. Have a notebook handy as you're going through it to like kind of keep notes on what you might do differently, or what you think of certain ways to do it. Also, this opening is dumb. I'd almost say a better opening would be to like give the exact same setup, and then once the characters get to Phandelver, Gundren Rockseeker's not there. So they have to figure that out, how there's an alternate path to Phandelver or something, and that's where they can find their dead horses or whatever. Just add a path somewhere. Just so it's not like this straightforward, this railroady. The players should always be the ones deciding what to do next. Even if it's an NPC coming up to them being like, I need you to deliver this or something. Even if it's like an NPC that's directly giving them a quest, the players should always be the ones who decide if they want to go on it. I mean, they probably will, but some players prefer doing things their own way. And if everyone's on board with that, you should totally let them do that. You can always find Cragmaw Cavern later on, maybe for some other reason, and that's where it goes on. And that's actually a good way to start this too, is to take the Gundren Rockseeker storyline out of it entirely until the players start discovering what happened. If you start in Phandelver, somebody might be like, hey, I meant to meet Gundren today, but he's late. Can you go check on him? I'll give you some gold for it. Likewise, this cave, if you want to, say, level it up a little bit, but still for level 1 people, you could make it so, like, instead of all the goblins here being kind of lazy and useless, you could have it so it's more like an army camp, and everything's, like, on high alert for one reason or another. Maybe they heard that the party was coming for some reason. Or maybe Sildar, while they were torturing him, said something about a party coming to get him, even though it was a lie. Always play to your group to a degree. Play for yourself, of course. Do the things that you want to do, but always do it in a way that the players would enjoy it. Very possible to, like, tweak this without really doing anything at all. Like, putting the goblins on high alert, or to make it a little more, like, interesting. Maybe the goblins are all stealth experts. I mean, goblins are kind of stealthy naturally anyway, but maybe these are all, like, trying to hide and tail the party. I mean, the whole cavern's in total darkness anyway, so that might kind of make sense that, like, they're all, like, hidden creatures of the night who are tailing the party just to see why they're there before they all reveal themselves at the same time in the main room or something like that. So it's like a good amount of goblins that ambushing them at the end here, and then maybe King Clark's like waiting to ambush them outside, and he's not King Clark, he's just like backup or something. Or maybe he's like an envoy from Cragmaw Castle, so then the players could maybe get more information on how to get there before they know how to get there, essentially. I'm just saying, with a little tweaking, this could be a little more interesting than the way it's presented. And keep in mind that most players only get to play each adventure once. So because of that, you can tweak things, no one will notice, If you add something here or subtract something there, no one will notice at all. And I think that's it for today. Just kind of like the advice I would do. Still, my ultimate advice is basically, this is your first game DMing, just do this as is. It'll kind of teach you in steps how to DM. Otherwise, maybe you might want to tweak it a little, and there's definitely ways you could make this dungeon a little more interesting. Please like and subscribe. I'm still starting out, but look forward to more content and good DMing.